but we just want to make something, and we want to give as much of the money back to the authors as possible so that they can pay their narrators, they can make some money, and I suspect along the way, readers will enjoy some lower prices because authors won't have to charge as much, and they have full control of their product on the platform. They can change their blurb and picture and all that kind of stuff. So We're not locking anybody out on anything. We're just trying to create, it's a marketplace, and we want it to be a middleman that's as skinny as possible. And it's blowing up. I mean, we went beta in June, and we just sent out some cold emails to some indie authors and a couple of the big book distributors and a couple of the big publishers.
Right. Almost
right away, two of the biggest book distributors, companies that have 40, 80,000 titles. We're like, we're in. We want, how do we do this?
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 344 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Eric T. Knight. Now, Eric, who grew up in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, which meant that his primary form of escape was reading, found himself leading into that passion for writing, which turned into a hearty, long fantasy series that he's released. Now, along the way, when he was making audiobooks, he discovered it comes at a huge cost. But where the world's largest platform, Amazon and Audible for indie authors, were paying authors significantly less, meaning it would take a lot longer to earn back their investment in audiobooks. Now, that, of course, was part of the inspiration behind StoryFair.net, a platform that authors can publish to that'll get them 75% of the audiobook retail price and will help them earn their money back on that audiobook investment a lot faster. Eric and I talk about his writing, about the launch of StoryFair, how it works, and so much more. And that's coming up later in this podcast. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by ScribeCount and my affiliate link to ScribeCount. What is ScribeCount, you may ask? Well, ScribeCount is a platform that allows you a single dashboard to track your sales of your titles from all of the major retail platforms. With ScribeCount, you set a single sign-on from ScribeCount. You can connect all of your accounts in one single platform. They don't have your password. You're using an app that's installed on your web browser. So your logins to Amazon and Kobo and Barnes & Noble and Google and Apple, Drafted Digital and other distributors are all collected for you. So when you log into ScribeCount on the same browser, all of your data is pulled into one comprehensive database where you can not only track your sales, but if you connect your Author Central account, you can track reviews that are coming in through there. You can track your spending on Amazon ads. For example, I'm running an Amazon ad right now for one of my titles, and I'm able to easily go into ScribeCount and check to see my sales on that title versus the spend on ads, and I can see where it's starting to dip below, meaning I've got to go in and make some adjustments. Nice and easy, single login. So in the morning, instead of having to log on to 4 or 5 different platforms that I'm using for my publishing, I simply need to log on to ScribeCount and see what's going on. There's a beautiful sunburst graph where you can see the sales at different platforms, and if you want to drill down by country or title, etc., it's so easy. I can click one title and I can see that title's sales across multiple platforms with the click of a few buttons. And if you want to see how you can leverage ScribeCount to save you time from doing all that analysis, logging into all those databases and looking at your sales, you can check out ScribeCount. You can check them out over at starkreflections.com/ScribeCount. Because really, you should be spending more time writing and marketing your books and less time having to look at the data. And ScribeCount makes that so much easier for you. And now for comments from recent episodes. Over on the X-Twitter sphere, I guess X-Twitter, that works. The indie author, at the indie author, and that's indie with a Y, says, writers, add this episode of the Author Wheel podcast to your listen list. It includes 3 of my favorite people, Greta Boris, Megan Haskell, and Mark Leslie, talking about one of my favorite topics, being radically wide. That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Maddie. I'm going to be talking a little bit about that in my personal update because it was such a wonderful conversation that Megan and Greta and I had, and appreciate the shout out, Maddie. So thank you so much. And again, if you're not familiar with Maddie, she's been a guest on the podcast several times, and I have been a guest on her awesome The Indie Author podcast several times. You could say we're old digital friends, and I think we met only for the first time in person in November of this past year at 20 Books. The first time in person, even though I've known Maddie for years, and we co-authored a book together. We co-authored Taking the Short Tack, which is basically a book looking at the business strategies of how an author can leverage short fiction for making more money, for marketing, etc. And that is an interesting fact, is Maddie was listening to this podcast and asked me to talk about short fiction. And that led to a whole episode, and that led to a conversation we had. And lo and behold, it led to a book, because that's just how things work with networking. Very awesome. So thanks, Maddie. And I got a message from Melanie Gilbert, who you're going to hear in a forthcoming interview. I just interviewed Melanie and her sister Heather. We had a fantastic conversation, and they'll be coming up as guests in a forthcoming interview, and I know you're going to love it because you're going to love the really amazing stuff that they do with their reading community. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the message, Melanie said, "Oh my gosh, I'm listening to your podcast where you tell about your license plate getting stolen," and that's something I talked about in. It must have been it had to be near Halloween. It would have been in October because stolen skeleton, etc. And Melanie related that had actually happened to her at a grocery store. And she was 7 months pregnant, so it was not good timing at all. And Melanie says that I definitely got more help and info than she did at the time, that she was just sent in circles, etc. Now, I guess I'm very, very lucky. I did have a video recording of the thief stealing not the license plate, because he was off camera for that, but I got him stealing my skeleton from my Halloween display, and that's one of the things that led to him. I'll have a link to that. I think I'll try and find that episode where I shared and talked about that. But thanks so much, Melanie. So sorry you had such a poor experience with your own license plate being stolen, but I'm so glad I had a chance to chat with you and Heather, and that you, dear listener, get a chance to hear that in a forthcoming episode. That's it for comments. One of the great things you can do is comment. Leave comments over at starkreflections.ca. You can message me. Lots of folks will direct message me all kinds of great things about the podcast. I love to share those comments with listeners on episodes because it reminds me that this is more of a conversation that we're having. This is us reflecting together. So you can comment. That's one of the ways you can support this podcast. You can share this podcast with someone that you think would find value in it. Leave me a review. And I just did. Greta said something about me at the very end of the episode of the Author Wheel podcast.
You have a very melodious and calming voice. When I'm stressed out about writing, it's like Stark Reflections is exactly what I need. Calms me down. You calm me down.
Thank you. I messaged her and said, "Hey, thanks. You gave me a really great testimonial right there." But again, that's just a review. Reviewing can help, but also you can become a patron of the podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections, where you get access to additional content, additional audio feed, additional posts and content that are only available for patrons. And every once in a while, I like to surprise patrons with something a little bit special. And this week, I would like to welcome new patron Rob Johnson. Rob, welcome to the community of patrons who support this podcast. I appreciate you guys so much that you're willing to insert a credit card and support this podcast in an additional way. It means so much to me, and I do appreciate all my patrons, and welcome Rob to the small but powerful family of patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Now, in news, I was a guest in a recent episode of the Author Wheel podcast, as I mentioned, with Greta Boris and Megan Haskell. And in that episode, I talk a little bit about overcoming self-doubt.
So I want to ask you, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about but before we go there, we always ask everybody, what is the greatest roadblock you've had to overcome to get where you are? And how did you overcome it?
I still haven't overcome the greatest roadblock. The greatest roadblock is often imposter syndrome that faces all of us at all points in our career. And I've been so lucky and so fortunate to have had some really incredible roles and to get to work with some amazing people. And the imposter syndrome comes from both the side of the business where I'm on stage beside like a big name author that I've always admired my entire life, or I'm interviewing them, or I'm a colleague hanging out with them, to I was just at a book signing event in a store this past weekend, and just remembering how amazing it is that there are people out there that buy and read my books, and that they do that willingly of their own volition, and they find it informative or entertaining or whatever it is. And I still feel like who am I to waste 8 hours of their time? So I think that can get in our way so many times. We don't take chances, or we don't do something because you think, who am I to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And I like to tell authors that, well, you are the best person to tell that story or to share that particular thing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or whatever. Everybody has something really valuable to share. And the worst thing you can do is hold back and not release that into the world, because there's a very good chance that even if it's only one person that you end up reaching, that you show them that they're not alone. And that's one of the most powerful things that we do as writers is we can get into the minds and hearts of the readers and ensure, and that really is what reading is about. Writing and reading is about, is that magical connection of writer and reader. And of course I get excited and very philosophical about it, but that's really what we're doing, isn't it, at the end of the day?
But that's just a teaser. I'll have a link to the full episode in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. And it's a reminder that I get to be a guest on podcasts, but I think I rarely mention it in my news about things I'm doing, because it's just part of the thing. I was actually in 2 other different podcasts in the same week, but I don't always remember to talk about them. I do post those over at markleslie.ca/news, and sometimes I even remember to tell people about all the places that I've been. But in other news, I just recently shared that as part of the Masters of Publishing program with Western Colorado University, and this is a program being taught by my friend Kevin Anderson, is we just announced, we just revealed the cover for Feisty Felines and Other Fantastical Familiars. It is a phenomenal anthology of fantastic stories about cat familiars and other familiars, other animals. And it is a magnificent collection. Of course, yes, I'm very, very biased, but a gorgeous cover designed by Alison Longuera. And that is revealed. I'll have a link to that, of course, in the show notes, because that book is coming out in July of 2024. And such an exciting project to be working on with my cohorts, with my fellow graduates from that Western Colorado University master's degree in creative writing, with, of course, a specialty in publishing. And that's just one of the many things that I'm working on. But I want to get on with this interview with Eric T. Knight. So, after the bumper, let's roll right into that. Hey, Eric, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So before we dig into all of the stuff I know we have to get to, because I'm so excited to talk about, I want to dig into your past and why was reading such a big thing in your life?
Well, it's just because in the early 1970s on a ranch in the Arizona desert in the middle of nowhere, there's just nothing else to do. We were way off the grid, so we only had electricity when we fired up the hand crank diesel generator.
Whoa.
So And then it's agriculture, so you're not supposed to be inside in the middle of the day anyway. You're supposed to be working. So there's only one TV channel, and you're going to watch or two, and you're going to watch what Dad wants to watch. So reading was a big escape. We worked all the time, and it was hard out there, but we were big readers, and that was just my escape. It was my escape. It was my main entertainment. We're 30 miles from town, so I'm stuck playing with my brother, who was as sick of me as I was of him. And so reading was just the way pretty much everyone in the family survived. And it just became a gateway for me to experience the rest of the world, because, we were 30 miles from a small town in rural Arizona. So we were way behind. By the time we found out something had happened, it was days later. So that was the way we connected to the world. And I think it just, I lived more in the books I read, I think, than I did in my regular life. I read in school instead of listening, and hid the book in my textbook, and that was it. It was my number one escape from everything.
Oh, wow. Was there a particular genre or genres that you were drawn to as a child?
I was drawn to whatever books I hadn't already read, because I was just a voracious reader, and so I quickly went through whatever was at the elementary school library, which was mostly seemed too childish to me.
Right.
So I would read my sister's book. Like, she got into a Louis L'Amour phase.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd read them when she brought them home, whenever she set one down. So she always was yelling at me that I was stealing her books. And I literally read Mom's romance novels if I didn't have anything else. And then I got a little bit older, and I started looking at the family library, which my family's been in ranching in Arizona since the 1800s.
Okay.
And they were one of these frontier families that believed in trying to bring some civilization out there. So an extensive library, and all classics. So in middle school, I'm just pulling down Edgar Allan Poe and Dickens and all these classic. I didn't even know there were classics, but you can only take so many books out of the library, and we didn't get to the library that often.
Yeah.
An hour-long bus ride to and from school. And so I started reading those. So really everything. I loved animal books, horse books, dog books. But I just read, if I read cereal boxes, if there was something to read, I just wanted to read.
Wow, that's amazing. So obviously your passion for story, your passion for what that did, at what point did that passion for consuming stories turn into a passion for wanting to create stories for others to consume?
Well, as we've talked about, when I got to college, I didn't think I had any creativity in me.
Right.
It never really been nurtured, and school's not about that really anyway. So it seemed impossible to me. And I tried to take journalism, because I thought, well, I do kind of like writing, but I was nervous about interviewing people, and I just started making up my interviews, and I thought, well, I shouldn't probably stick with journalism then. And then I stumbled on after a year or two, and I was a business major, and I didn't like any of it. And I took a creative writing class, a 101 class, and it was amazing. And one of the things I loved about it, school had always been easy for me and not a challenge, and I wasn't interested in it. And here was this thing that it didn't matter how long I worked at, I was never going to master it. It would always give me a challenge.
Right.
And I was awful. I was truly awful. And yet I worked at it really hard. It was the only class I really cared about, and I put all kinds of time into it. I managed to borrow a computer. This is like 1984, so I've got a compact, what is it? A 128, a Commodore 128. And because I discovered, well, writing by hand and then typing, it takes a lot of time, and then you can't get as much writing done. So that was when I started, and I was like, I love to do this. And it was such a challenge, and I was so bad at it. But I was like, if I keep working, I'm going to get somewhere someday on this.
So how did that translate into, creating these stories and then keep working on them? How did that translate into getting that work into other people's hands or on their eyeballs?
Well, I spent 25 years pursuing the standard route of getting agents and going directly to publishers. And so I mailed off, hundreds of manuscripts, and because I started writing after I finished college, and I started my first book, and
Right.
And I started in horror because I was a huge Stephen King fan. The 80s for me were a big time for horror.
Yeah.
And so I started writing that, and I actually did get an agent, and a real agent, not just one that charges you money. And you know, I got some success. I got past the first tier a couple of times, but I could never get published. And meanwhile, I just kept writing on different books. And I started a fantasy series because I was a huge fantasy fan. You know, Lord of the Rings just kind of blew me away in high school. I'd always liked fairy tales. And then when I discovered that there were fairy tales out there for adults, I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. So I started my first fantasy series in like 1991 or something like that, which that became my major focus. It was a trilogy first, and I wrote the whole thing over a 10-year period while writing other books. And then I went back and said, I started the story too soon. So I started back, and by the time I caught up to where the original trilogy was, most of the original trilogy no longer applied. So I completely rewrote it all. And so it was 4 or 5 books by then. And when I heard about Kindle, I was still trying to go because I thought that was not what real writers did. And I just couldn't get in. And so I put up my first fantasy book on Kindle just for fun. And one of my coworkers, his wife got a hold of it and read it. And he came to work one day and said, she told me, and I'm a teacher at the time, which is fine, to tell you that if you're doing anything other than writing, you're wasting your time. So
Wow.
I was teaching English, which I didn't very much like. I liked the kids, but not the subject matter. And so that motivated me to start working at it. And by 2015, 16, somewhere around there, I decided to get serious about it and really get all my books up there and start meeting with learning from other authors, how to do the whole indie publishing world. I mostly failed miserably for a year or two, and then it finally started to take off. And I kept writing the whole time.
That is amazing to get that early reader, like with your first book that you published, not the first book you wrote, the first book you published, to actually have a reader, obviously acknowledge that there's something here.
Yeah, it felt good because when you get rejected for 25 years, by the late 2000s, I put it down. I put writing down for a year or two. I was just like, you start to think, maybe I just suck at this, because it's so hard to tell your friends and family read things. And so, oh, yay, Mom, you're a big fan of mine, but you're my mother. And so, and you just get rejection letters after rejection letters. And that's if they answer at all. A lot of them just don't even answer, at least they didn't again. And so I started thinking, oh God, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then when she said she really liked it, I was like, that's all I really need. One person with no reason to make up how they feel about it. And it just really helped light my fire. It just, sometimes you need a little boost. Which is why whenever people bring me their work, I try so hard to give them something positive before if they ask me how did I do, but talk about, because gosh, it's such a fragile thing when you create this thing you love, and it's so scary to share it with the world, and then it's so easy to get crushed. And so it crushed me for a while.
So I guess you got that. I'm just trying to think about the flip of the mindset, right? Because you talked about that real writers don't do that. So when you got that feedback, one would think that with the mindset of real writers don't do that, you're like, oh, good, now I can get an agent because I have this proof. Or did you just go, yeah, I'm done with being kicked in the face. I'm gonna control my own destiny. Is it like, what was that switch for you?
I didn't make the switch right away. I continued. In fact, I got, after a couple of years, I decided maybe I should try the indie thing, because I was still trying to get agents and whatnot. But my last gasp was like 2016 or something. I'm like, I'm literally going to hit 50 agents. I'm going to hit 50, all of them that say that they're accepting unsolicited manuscripts, all of them, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I'm going to hit 50, and then I'm going to see, and then I'm going to try. And really 80% of them never responded. And then none of the rest were interested. And I was like, okay, it's time to give that up. And then, getting into the field further and listening to authors and how many of them got into bad contracts. A lot of them, like some of them, they get on with the publisher, and then their editor would change, and the new editor doesn't want to publish the book. And so the book just sits there, it doesn't get published, but they no longer own the rights to it. And so they can't even get their book out there. And they just, all the headaches and nightmares that people run into, and losing their rights. And looking back, I'm really glad, because I also didn't want them to make me do things like Hollywoodize my book. Like, I am not going to take these two main characters, a male and female, whose friendship is a huge part of the whole series, and let you tell me I have to make them fall in love,
Right.
because that's not the story. And I suspected I would run into some of that, and the tropes and what they want, what they're looking for. And so I was glad that I got to write the series exactly the way I wanted to. And I think that was important for what I was trying to do, which is something a little different than what I'd seen other people do. So
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. And then you've released what, 18 fantasy novels?
I have 18 fantasy novels, yes.
Are they all the same series, or have you done crossovers?
There's 17 of the 18 are all in the same world. And
Okay.
there's 3 series, and they all link, and they run chronologically. So the first series is it's kind of the parents of everyone. Is this all that these guys solve and defeat the enemy, and then it's 20 years later, and they're still around, a lot of the series, but they're no longer the main characters. It's now the next generation
Right.
that takes over with the next iteration of dealing with this immortal villain that's in the background of all of them. And then the third series is less connected. It's again the same villain, same world, but in a different part of the world with all new characters. But they're all linked together, and they can be read in any order, although going in chronological order is the best. For some people, it's better to start on the third series. It's a little easier. As fewer, it's only one point of view. Like my first series, I just went crazy with points of view. I love points of view, but not everybody's thing. So my third series was like, we're going to stick to one main character and follow it all from his point of view. So,
Wow. So for anyone whose interest is piqued, what are the names of the series?
well, the whole thing, the whole 3 series together, it's a Chaos Legacy.
Okay.
And then it's the first one is Immortality and Chaos, and the second one is Chaos and Retribution. Then the third one's the Dragon Queen of Chaos. And fundamentally, they're all dealing with the same, this immortal being, one of the two at the heart of the universe, chaos and order. And order, the being of order had just disappeared however far in the past. And what was left was chaos. And so chaos was imprisoned as a way to keep her from devouring everything, because they don't have the balance of the Lord of Order. And then the books are all about her efforts to escape, based on using human agents and that kind of thing. But they all tie back to the same fundamental, not really villain, but more of just a chaotic force, but a dragon queen still. You got to have a villain.
Yeah, of course, very important aspect. So I found out about you because of passion that you had for audio, and not only for that, but for helping authors overcome, oh, this sounds familiar, overcome the barriers of traditional publishing or existing platforms or existing patterns of behavior for audio. Can you talk a little bit about what sparked your interest in audio first, and then what that led to?
Well, I got into audio a few years ago because, of course, that's where it's moving and everybody loves it. And most of my friends my age say, I'm sorry, I just don't read anymore. I don't have time. But if you have it on audio, I'll listen to it. So I got into that. I released a couple of books, but they never went anywhere. And I never pushed them very hard because I didn't want to be exclusive to Amazon. I didn't want to sign a 7-year contract. One of the things I like about being an indie is not getting locked in, it's just staying flexible. So when you don't sign the exclusive contract with Amazon, they only pay 25% royalties.
Right.
Now I'm spending $8,000-9,000 a book to get these made. And then I've, of course, I've got marketing and everything and covers and all that. And then I'm only getting 25% of my money, and they don't allow me to control the price. I can't do sales. I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of stewed on that for a couple of years. And then about 2 years ago, started talking with a friend of mine who's also an author, and my wife, who's been my biggest supporter. And without her bookkeeping abilities and everything, I wouldn't be where I am. And then her support and encouragement. But and I said, why don't we just make our own app and make our own website, sell our own? And first I was just like, I have 24 books eventually. They're not all in audio yet. I'll just, even if all I do is sell my books, I can I can keep the money instead of only getting 25% of the money. And so we got into this, and of course, like any new endeavor, it's bigger than you thought. It grew up. You realize that it's more complicated than you realize. There's a lot of the details that go into making it all work. And I'm not even the one in charge of that. That's my partner Sean, and thank goodness, because that's just too much. But so we put it together, and then we went in June. We went into beta, and just called the company StoryFair, because we think it should be fair for readers, and because readers are also paying a higher price than they need to, because and authors aren't making enough money. Everything's all because Audible's taking all the money. And so we do 75% royalty. We pay 75% royalties. We pay the next month and not 2 months down the road, which makes it really hard to run a small business. Your cash flow's messed up. We have no contracts. We think anyone selling on our platform should be selling on every other platform. I got my books on multiple platforms. You should never have all your eggs in one basket, but we're going to give you 75%, no contracts, pay you fast, and we're working on an affiliate program that's far and away the best in the business. Depending on sales, because it tiers up like how much percentage, you can earn up to 10% affiliate fees. And then that every customer you bring in, you get affiliates on all their purchases for 6 months instead of 24 hours with Amazon and whatever it is, 2%, I don't know what it is now. And so the idea is we're trying to keep, our expenses as low as possible. It's still just the three of us. Eventually we'll have to hire people, but we just want to make something, and we want to give as much of the money back to the authors as possible so that they can pay their narrators, they can make some money. And I suspect along the way, readers will enjoy some lower prices because authors won't have to charge as much, and they have full control of their product on the platform. They can change their blurb and picture and all that kind of stuff. So we're not locking anybody out on anything. We're just trying to it's a marketplace, and we want it to be a middleman that's as skinny as possible. And it's blown up. I mean, we went beta in June, and we just sent out some cold emails to some indie authors and a couple of big book distributors and a couple of the big publishers. Almost right away, two of the biggest book distributors, companies that have 40, 80,000 titles, we're like, we're in. We want, how do we do this? And we thought we were going to have like a year period of just dealing with indies, and we'd get 20, 40 at a time, and we could handle all this, and most of them will have 1 to 3 books, and so we could build up, and then we go back after the bigger fish to try to get more titles on the site. So that set us all back, because we thought, we'll only be in beta a couple of months. We're pretty close. Well, then suddenly we have to handle, the first one is like, here's 20,000 titles. And in bringing in that many and getting them populated, you've got to write all kinds of programs and code. And then every time there's an error and blah, blah, blah. So, and then not only did they come along, but then another one did. And then we've actually had one of the big 5 publishers reach out to us recently. And so we've been talking with them as well. And so we went fully live in November, but we haven't really made any noise about it. And we tried to keep it down low because we're solving all these books, 40, current count 40,000 on the site. And so we're kind of behind because we're a year ahead, at least a year ahead of where we thought we'd be. We knew people would like it, but we thought it would take a little longer to catch on. And we went to the 20 books to 50K conference, and we had a table. And that really kind of got us a big boost there too. But we've got some authors that are like, come on, solve. We have a lot of stuff that's live, but we have some other problems. And it's like, sorry, we didn't think we would have to scale up our infrastructure like that. Now we have, and we're very close. And in the next couple of weeks, we'll have it. But we've still got to figure out a few things. But it's been way more response than we expected. And that's a good thing, but it's also caused its share of headaches. You'd like a nice, calm, steady growth, and business doesn't. This isn't my first business. They don't usually go there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a better problem to have than nobody shows up, right? As you're trying to build it. But yeah, it's still a problem because you have all these plans you can't implement because you're too busy playing catch up. So just to remind listeners, whenever they're listening to this, is that you were talking about launching in June of 2023. It was November 2023 that you brought it to 20 Books Vegas.
and we're talking in early January, very early January 2024. For those of you listening from the future, hello from the
Yes.
past. So let's start off with StoryFair is the name of the platform.
StoryFair. Yeah.
For listeners, for audiobook listeners, where do they go? How do they sign up? Are there apps? How does this work?
Well, there's a website. We're not allowed to sell books on the app. We could, but on Apple, if you sell anything through the app on the Apple store, you have to give them 30%. Well, now we can't give
You can't, you can't give
75%.
75%. You'll be 5% in the hole.
Right.
Yeah,
So
which
the
is
app is for listening.
yeah, same
Generally
thing with
speaking,
Android and Apple have very similar sort of. You can't sell through the app, which is where the credit system works really well on Audible and Kobo and stuff like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So we essentially advertising push people toward the website. And then
Okay.
on the website, you have a product page. You click on it, you buy, and then it prompts you to open the app.
Okay.
And open the app, and then the book will already that you just bought will be on the app.
So the app I buy online and then I listen to it conveniently on my cell phone.
Yeah, on your phone. We've
Wow.
got it's Android Auto and CarPlay versions. We're working on one for Roku TVs. That'll be one of the next ones.
Oh, that's cool. That's
People are
fantastic.
using that to listen. But yeah, it should work on pretty much all devices now. You say that, but of course, the way these work,
Right.
inevitably someone's phone doesn't work on it. So those are the
Work
kinds
on my
of problems.
1982 flip phone.
Yeah. My BlackBerry won't play. Yeah, but it's meant to be pretty seamless so that I can put down my phone and pick up my tablet and find the same spot
Right.
and go from there and switch to other ones. And another benefit for the before I forget, for the readers, the listeners, is that unlike say Audible and so much what Apple does, you own these books. These are yours. You won't ever have them taken away. You're not, because you're all that stuff on your Kindle, you're essentially borrowing or leasing or something, but you don't own that stuff. So
Yeah.
this is yours. And also we really want readers to know, if you want to support your favorite authors, they make a lot more money here than they will if you go elsewhere.
Yeah.
So
Love that idea. It's funny as you're talking about old phones, I just realized I have this old dial phone on
yeah,
my
I
desk
saw that.
as a prop. I was like, it won't work on my phone. It won't work on my phone.
Those old fake light
Is it
phones.
StoryFair.net? Is that where you go to?
Yeah, StoryFair.net, and then it's even set up to where, because at 20 books we were giving away copies of one of my books. You can actually even listen to a book on the app without making a full account. I mean, we have to take an email address because right now we're only in the United States, and so and then it's legal stuff, and but I think we've made it easy. We're trying to make it just as easy as we can and try to give everybody what they're looking for.
Right.
And we'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of things we can still work on, but
Yeah.
initial responses are good, and everyone is just they're just banging on our door like, come on, hurry up. Like, there's 3 of us and the holidays just happened, and so
Yeah.
we're getting there, but it's just gonna be a couple more weeks. We're very close.
Well, I want to clarify something, because this is a podcast primarily for authors, is that even though the purchasing of your audiobooks is only available to consumers in the US, authors from outside the US, like myself in Canada, are able to create an account and upload. So let's talk about, how does an author who wants to get their content into StoryFair, what are the various options for them?
Well, just go to StoryFair.net, and it's pretty simple, and just follow around and set it up. And then at some point, the tricky things with international is money, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm not really in charge of this. My wife does all this, so
Yeah,
my information should be taken with a grain of salt. But I found that with international, we're having to use more PayPal, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
No, the only thing for international is we don't have our app available for international users. Now, I've had people in England, I don't know how they get it. They can go get the app anyway, but it won't show up in the UK store because we don't have,
Right.
it has to do with the taxation and all that kind of stuff that we
Yeah.
just haven't had a chance to solve yet. But yeah, you just go right on there and follow the steps through and set up. You've got, we don't we don't have anybody's banking information. What you do is we point you to, these are the places you need to go where we can accept money from, and then all your banking's done with them. We just
Yeah.
want one fewer place where all your information is exposed for people.
Right.
It's not out there. So really, when people set up an account, there's not a lot to do with us. It's really, we just need to know your email and some location stuff, and then your name and all that, and then we set up the payment stuff so that we can take care of that.
Right. Okay, cool. So an author can go create an account,
Yeah.
upload their content, and then they benefit from the higher percentage royalties that they would earn.
We pay by the 10th of the month. We have the payments made by the 10th of the following month whenever a purchase is made.
Oh, wow, that's really fast. Yeah.
Now, that said, we can't control how long it takes for your bank to distribute it, because what we find is, oh, we sent the payment on the 5th, and someone's sitting there on the 11th going, where's my money? Well,
Yeah.
we sent it. It's in your bank's hands now, and that we can't control. But
Of course.
I'm the only charge, like, there's no hidden fees. We give you 75% less bank fees because we can't control what those are.
Yeah.
And so those are typically going to be a couple of percent. But at least for the U.S. market, I know last year the Fed announced that they are going to set up a new money transfer service that they'll go through all the major banks, which should make money transfers happen much more quickly and cheaper than they were, because we're
Right.
paying 3 to 4% credit card rates. It eats into everybody's bottom line. And so
Right.
I hope that this year they'll get that all online and we can get the money over even faster. Because ideally what we'd like to do is, once WIC clears and the money's in our account, we'd just like to send it to you right away. You don't even, we just have to do the end of the month now because we haven't had time to build the infrastructure. But our
Right.
goal is to really, that money's, once we have it in our account, we're not looking to hold it. We're looking to like pay you and
Right.
get it, because you need it for marketing and books and all that kind of thing. So we want to get that, because it's something that we've suffered with. It's waiting all this time for your money to come in.
Right.
Why can't I just have it now? I mean, basically we just tried to do how did we want to be treated? And I actually hope someday that as we grow, that our expenses will drop per customer, and maybe we can give 80% one of these days, or maybe we can whatever.
Right.
But I would like to, again, take as small a slice out of that as possible, because it's just a marketplace. We're not going to advertise your book. You need to go advertise your book, because we're giving you the money to do that. We will at some point have a budget and advertise the site, but
Right.
we don't have the money to do that, because we're not keeping all your money.
Yeah.
But then that also puts authors in a position of, they get to make their own marketing decisions. They get to, as they have the control over it. That's what we're really trying to do.
No, I love that. I love that. And then I think because you are working with obviously with some larger players, are there any indie friendly distributors that are supplying content to you for those authors who are averse to doing a lot of
Right.
extra work?
So we have both Blackstone Publishing on
Yep.
board, and they're a distributor, and we have Authors Republic, and I'm not quite sure how their structure works out, but because well, Blackstone is distributing and publishing, so I think you can go to
Yeah.
them with publishing help. And then Authors Republic, I'm not quite as sure, but those are the two we're working with.
Right.
And they've been very enthusiastic. They're definitely on board with this. They're going to help us contact their authors that they already have in their stable.
Yep.
So those, I just, at least from our experience with them, they've been very pleasant and professional, and they're
good.
very excited about all of this. Well, for
All
them,
right,
it
so
makes more money for their bottom line. So.
yeah, so authors, if you're with Blackstone or with Authors Republic, make sure that you're making sure that StoryNet is included or StoryFair, my apologies. StoryFair is included in that distribution strategy. That's fantastic. So I mean, wow, it almost sounds like an author who was struggling and having problems wanted to make it easier for other authors to do all those things. Wow. Love that.
Yeah, and just to make it cheaper, when you can recoup, you can get a return on your investment at 75% versus 25%, or you could sign the contract and get 40%.
Yeah.
It's just, you can make the economics work so much better. At 20 books, we talked to a lot of authors who said, well, I want to get into audio, but I don't know if I can afford it. Well, guess what? You at least, I can't change your cost, but I can get you your money back faster.
Right.
And that changes the whole dynamics of because this is a business and we all have to make money off it. And
Yeah.
we just want to make it easier. It's again, we're not the only ones. We've been inspired by other businesses like BookFunnel that really take good care of their authors, and they provide the things we need. And they're not always, you deal with the big platforms, they're always trying to nibble off another piece. And your money you make just kind of keeps going down and down and down. And
Right.
that's what big corporations do. And we're like, let's have an alternative to that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we get close to wrapping up the conversation, for any authors who are listening who haven't yet made it into audio or just gotten into audio, because it is very expensive, what's some advice you would offer? Because you've been through it. You spent the $8,000, $9,000 per, like I've been lucky. The most I've spent, my books tend to be shorter, but the most I spent is about 4,500 US on audiobooks. And still, I mean, that book, I still haven't made my money back yet.
Well,
So what's the advice you would offer to authors thinking about audio?
Well, first of all, like don't let the $8,000-9,000 scare you. That's our high end, and that's because we got, oh gosh, I'm going to draw a blank on their names right now, but they do Brandon Sanderson's books. Gosh, I can't believe it. Anyway, we got some big names.
But enough said. They do Brandon Sanderson's books.
Yeah,
They're
and
not
so-
some guy who just hung up a shingle and said, I'm a narrator.
But I have a narrator working on the one of my series who's I just found him on one of these places like Fiverr, but not Fiverr, is one that's based on narration. That's all that I can find. Can't remember the name of them. And just, I got a whole bunch of people putting in samples, and I've actually been paying him more because his price was too low. After the first book, I'm like, this is your first audiobook. He's been a voiceover actor for some years. But I said, you're too good to make $250 a finished hour.
Yeah.
And so I pay you more. But if you're trying to get through and you don't have a big budget, go look. You find people that are looking to break in, and they'll make it very reasonable for you.
Yeah.
And if you find someone that you can work with, but it's so important to get a good narrator. I've discovered that narrators have made me view my own work differently because they will bring their own flavor to it. A good narrator it's like I've written a screenplay, and this narrator is the director and all the actors. And you get a good narrator, they can bring characters to life in ways you hadn't thought about. Sometimes I'm like, that's not what that character would do. And after a while, I'm like, that's really good. You took the character and ran with it a little bit. So if you look around, you can find people that can really, that'll save you some money. And that's what you kind of need to do when you get started. You can also do profit sharing, and we will have something like that on our site, so that if you're doing profit sharing with the narrator in lieu of an upfront payment, the money will be divided automatically, so that you don't have to worry. That'll make it easier for everybody. But that's it. Look for a good narrator, because boy, if you're going around looking for the big names, you're probably not gonna be able to afford them, and they're all a year out or 2 years out, and you can't get them on. You have to book them so far away. But you can find people out there who are really good, who I'll start today, and it's exciting to see your work in a whole new light. Something you read yourself 20 times, and then you're like, gosh, I never heard it that way. So
wow, that's amazing. All right, so we know where people can find StoryFair at storyfair.net. Right. But can you please let my listeners know where they can find more about you online?
Well, my website, which is currently down because I'm building a Shopify store, is erictknight.com. You got to have the T in there because there's other Eric Knights. Or all my books are on Amazon, and they'll stay on Amazon. It's a platform that a lot of people like, so all my books are on there. I don't have any audiobooks on there right now, but those will get added in later. But yeah, if you go to Amazon and put the T in there with the Eric T. Knight. Otherwise, I've seen some strange books come up that some other Eric Knights that are mine.
Awesome. Well, Eric, thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Nothing satisfies me more than somebody who sees something, who sees a lack of something, who recognizes a need for something, and then figures out a way that they can provide that to the world. Because it's not only going to solve the problem that they're having, but it's going to solve the problem that other people are having. That's exactly what Eric and company have done with StoryFair.net. They saw something that they wanted to have, and they got up and did that. And that's one of the things, of course, I love about indie publishing is we did the same thing. We saw that there was a gap in the market, that there's a gap in community. I was just talking to Jeannie Frost on the Draft to Digital Self-Publishing Insiders, and it was a case of her wanting to tell a story from Bones, her vampire main character. It was kind of like the same story that she had initially told in the very first novel she had released from the hunter's point of view, the female hunter's point of view. And now she wanted to tell the story from Bones' point of view, because there's a lot of things that character, you never get to hear about that character because it's from character's A point of view, not character B's point of view. And the publisher said, well, no one's buying vampire fiction right now, and the typical stuff. And it's not because they're dumb. It's not because they don't know what's going on. It's because they're very limited. Their hands are tied. They can't release the things all the time that they want to release. So an indie author can fill the gap, because guess what? There were a ton of readers who wanted that. And the way that Janine discovered that is she was writing it because she wanted to. It was fun. Put it up on her website and saw that there was a big market for it. Saw that there was a demand for it, and then gave them the book, and has been a runaway bestseller ever since. So authors who see that there's a gap or need in the market, filling that gap. Think about this episode's sponsor, ScribeCount. This is Randall Wood, basically an author seeing that there was a gap. Think about BookFunnel. Damon Courtney from BookFunnel was an author, fantasy author. And then he saw that people were having trouble giving copies of their books to readers who signed up for the newsletter. So he created BookFunnel as a way to help other authors with that very same problem. Again, what I'm saying is that the entire sphere of the indie author world is built upon seeing a need for something and not waiting for someone else to do it, but going and doing it yourself. Such power, such control. And I love that we're taking that control. I love that we're not only, doing the things ourselves, but we're helping others by, either paving a path and showing them how it's done, or building stuff that other people can leverage and other people can take advantage of. The other thing I wanted to reflect on, and this is really important, I mean, it leads to Eric's passion for reading and writing, and just thinking about growing up in the middle of nowhere. And he said it was like more than an hour drive to get to the nearest library. And when he got to the library, he just read everything in sight, right? He got whatever he could. Reminded me a lot of my own childhood when I was growing up in Levack, Ontario, about an hour northwest of Sudbury, Ontario. And our library, the Levack Public Library, was attached to the public school. And it closed for a month and a half over the summer. And I remember, because there was an hour drive to get to a bookstore or the Sudbury Library, so there was nothing else in town. I mean, we had the mini mart, and that's where I could buy comic books and magazines and stuff like that. But actual books didn't really have access to them until you went into town, which, we did once a month maybe. It was a big, massive trip, and it had to take the whole day. And the whole day was about going into Sudbury to hit all these different stores for sales and stuff like that. So it was very orchestrated. And I remember the thrill of knowing we were going to be in a certain part of town, going, Mom, can you drop me off at Bay Used Books so I can go to the bookstore there and check them out? But that leads back to the fact that the library was closed in the summer. And I remember, I think you were allowed to check out 12 or 14 books at a time. And over the summer, checking out the maximum and knowing that I wasn't going to make it till the end of the summer without having read all those books. And so that was just something that reminded me of my own childhood and Eric's childhood. But I think about how powerful the library was for both Eric and for myself. Having a library in or close to our community was so critical for our foundation as readers and eventually as writers. So think about how powerful that was for us as young people. Think about how powerful that can be for readers out there. For you as an author, of course, to have your stuff in the libraries and available to libraries, but also for readers to be able to access your stuff. They'll be able to access your stuff completely for free. And they should be able to, because the library is such a beautiful, powerful, magical place. So, your homework for this week is to reflect on either your library from your youth, where you grew up, maybe your first encounter with the library. I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections on that. But also, just think about the local library to where you are now, the libraries that are closest to you now. And are these places that you've actually had a chance to visit? Are there ways that you're accessing and connecting with them? Is this something that you as an author can offer to them? Doing a talk about the kind of thing that you're writing, even just writing in itself, maybe how you get your books out into the world to help other writers, because the library is there as a vital part of our community, has given so much to us. I love to think about ways that I and we as writers, as creative people, can give back to those communities and to those libraries. And so thank you, Eric, for the great reflections that you've given me. Thank you, dear listener. I hope you've had something fun to reflect on. I would love to hear your reflections about libraries or audiobooks or fantasy novels, anything that you really want to share. Love to, and you can leave your reflections over at starkreflections.ca. You can drop them in the notes over at YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, or tag me on social media, or even email me, mark@markleslie.ca, because I love reflecting on the things that you're thinking about when you're listening to this podcast. But that is it for this episode. Until next week, and until next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you, dear listener, great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.